First speaker is the Prime Minister, Stefan Löfven of the Social Democratic Party. Please, you have the floor.
Tack, herr talman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 230 days from now, we have a general election in this country. In a situation in time where this country of ours is doing both well and less well. We inherited a major deficit in the public finances with an underfunding of the general welfare, and youth unemployment was so high that we received compensation from the EU to assist us. That's uncommon, but that was the situation nevertheless. One step at a time, we've now changed the cap of our policies. Inefficient tax deductions, failing to create jobs have been done away with. An untenable migration policy has been refocused, and unjust tax reductions have been replaced by large-scale investments in more teachers, police officers and more staff in healthcare and care services for the elderly. The outlook is brighter today in many ways. But it is quite obvious that there are major problems in society as well, with violent crime, which in no way can be accepted. We're going to push back on that. As a society, we haven't taken it seriously enough to deal with the integration problems, new arrivals. Those who have new arrivals to this country need to get out into the labour market more quickly. Our welfare state is still unique, but it doesn't always deliver on its promises, and we intend to improve the situation. This, to me, is the most important task for our politics in the next few while. We need more efforts, more resources, but none of these problems can be resolved by way of reducing taxes on a large scale. Last year, more than 300 shootings took place. More than 40 people lost their lives. We've seen new shootings at the beginning of this year in Malmö, in Helsingborg, in Uppsala and in Stockholm. We see people involved in crime with an absolute and complete lack of respect for human life. And it's a terrible development, and I'm determined to turn this around. So we're going to hit back with force against violent crime. In over 30 areas, we're strengthening the sanctions, we're adding resources to the police organization, but we need to do more. So we've now decided to attack the financial resources of the criminal elements. These gangs are fighting for power and influence and money, but when the police in Södertälje and Stockholm, working with the tax authorities, the white-collar crime, and other customs authorities and other agencies attack jointly, it has an impact. In Sweden, the criminal sectors have found channels into the welfare sector to make money. In the services sector, in construction, more or less everywhere we see black illegal jobs. And with this black parallel economy, we see conflict and the abuse of people. We are going to continue to combat the parallel society with tenacity and endurance, and when we crush the financial structures of the criminal organizations, we will be successful. We need to have a broad support, work together, we need to strengthen rules, enhance controls, step up organizational support between governmental organizations and coordination, and we will make sure that our tax money is used where it was intended and never ever into the pockets of those who are involved in criminal activities.
And the next speaker is Kristersson from the Moderate Party.
Herr talman.
Mr. Speaker, last year more than 300 so-called shootings took place in Sweden. This is a new term in Sweden, but something we have gotten used to very quickly, with some 235 injured, several dead. We've seen criminals with grenades. It's as if we were at war. The new year, 2018, also started with a man being killed by a hand grenade in Stockholm, in a suburb to Stockholm. So we see gang criminality in suburbs, in cities, and very often police cars and core functions of the society are being attacked, and we also see attacks on police officers' homes. We also have an example with the hospitals and nurses being afraid to reveal their names, and other assistants sleeping with the bats close to their beds. And we see gang violence escalating in streets in Malmö, and this is also noticeable immediately in the hospitals in Malmö. That was a quote, and it was not from a criminal novel. It is Sweden, 2018. What we need is legislation that's much more stringent. If you threaten someone at a Swedish hospital, you should be penalized. If you threaten someone working at a Swedish hospital, you should be punished severely. Doctors, nurses, they should not have to meet these violent, threatening individuals. They should be stopped before they enter the hospitals. We should have police doing that. We also want doubled punishments for criminals in gangs. They should be locked away for longer, and we should also have bans so that we can dismantle these gangs. We should have more stringent penalties if you threaten witnesses, and if you commit violent crime, you should be expelled from the country. This is a new policy that we need, and it would be nice, it would be good if the current government would take those threats seriously and not just say that this was something caused by the old government that left about 4 years ago. And this is not negotiable. We need a dialogue, but we first need to stop violence. And this takes more police officers, not fewer. In absolute numbers, we have as many police officers today as we had in 2009 in Sweden, but police density has not been as low in 10 years, so the curve is heading in the wrong direction, and we see more of a reduction in the numbers of police officers during 2016, 2017, not enough people applying to the police academy, wages too low and working conditions too difficult for the police officers, and the political support for these people that work very hard, that's not strong enough. And we cannot create people being a situation where people are being scared, but we need to see reality, we need to face reality, and we need to do everything we can to fight violent crime. Last time we met in this chamber, I talked about the migration policy, about Sweden taking our part of the responsibility for a broken world, but we also need to take the full responsibility for what happens in Sweden. I offered a long-term agreement with the Social Democratic Party, and that offer still stands when it comes to migration policy. I also would like to note the fact that Germany is now thinking along the same lines with a migration policy that's well thought through, which is necessary if we want good integration. And we could perhaps reach an agreement on immigration, but integration will be more difficult because it's not easy to understand what the current government wants. We, the moderate party, we feel that it's about jobs, it's about language, and it's about posing demands. So jobs to start with. We have a proposal from the Alliance about basic. We have a sector for domestic services with some 30,000 new jobs that have been created. And most of these individuals working there, they were born abroad. And secondly, language. I've talked about the importance of the Swedish language and how important it is for integration. I've done that several times. And many people feel that, well, I'm talking about minority languages, but they're confused. I'm talking about something that we've always known, which is that you have to manage the language of a country if you want to become a citizen of that country. And here in Sweden, we speak Swedish. Well, it's a good thing if you talk several languages, but you have to speak Swedish. And if you have a residence permit, if you become a citizen, well, along this path, we need to have clear requirements. And the Swedish language is not enough if you want to be fully integrated, but it is a necessity. And thirdly, Swedish integration policy policy should also have clear requirements. We should be clear in our expectations, the expectations we have on people who come here. If you do not have basic school, you need to get back to school, and everyone needs to understand the basics about society, and it's not just about passively sitting in a classroom. You have to become employable, and here you have a responsibility. You cannot just expect to get money from the state. And I do not know if our policy proposals will be enough, but I know that we need to be prepared to do a lot more, because we have problems that will not solve themselves. And that is something that we've been trying in Sweden for way too long. So jobs, language and clear requirements, and this so that more people can be successful in our country. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Jimmie Åkesson of the Sweden Democrats. You have the floor.
Tack, herr talman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hope that everyone had a pleasant time over Christmas and the New Year. I certainly did. Very nice time. But also, in particular the weeks after the New Year, I struggled with an increasing feeling of discomfort, a sensation which has grown day by day as I've read newspapers and watched TV news. People who are being shot to death in pizzerias. People who die from hand grenades they find in the street. Attacks on the police officers and police stations and police vehicles. The particularly exposed areas are growing in number and size. The degree to which crimes are resolved is dropping. The confidence in our police, similarly. People are more worried about crime. Mr. Speaker, I don't recognize Sweden anymore. This is not Sweden. It simply cannot be Sweden. But then I realize, in fact, that it is. It's the new Sweden. The new, exciting, dynamic, amazing, multicultural kingdom of happiness that so many in this assembly, both now and previously, have fought to create over a number of years. And this is where we are. Well done, all of you. Mr. Speaker, I simply cannot tolerate how the Prime Minister over and over again repeats his standard phrase, "It's unacceptable. We need good order." This is just an empty mantra, void of content. I don't want to hear one more member of the Moderate Party in this assembly throwing the blame on somebody else, complaining about the development of crime, not least Mr. Kristersson, who was a member of the government of Fredrik Reinfeldt and who is very much part of those who bear the responsibility for the current situation. The area of crime, organised crime in particular, are becoming more and more aggressive. We see it now in our discussions on how many police officers we need in 5 or 10 years from now. But they're permanently stepping up and expanding. The serious and organised crime moving into new parts of new cities, restricting and impacting the everyday life of ordinary citizens. Mr. Speaker, only 8 months from now, we have a general election in Sweden. Sweden Democrats hereby declare war on serious organised crime. We are prepared to forcefully and in earnest take action using all available resources and methods. Of course, police resources and competences need to be dimensioned in accordance with the actual reality of the situation. We've understood this perhaps more so than any other party is here. We want to enhance the capability and resources. Secret coercive measures should be available as an option. It should be possible to have temporary nighttime bans on going outside, curfews, working with and having rules where it's sufficient to prosecute a criminal organisation, and no acceptance on trying to interfere with legal procedures. Special witnesses of the Crown will have special provisions. The protection of witnesses and victims of crime will be strengthened, etc. All of these measures will take time to implement, and I think it's become pretty clear to each and every one of us that the police organisation, the way it stands, the way it looks right now, the way they operate, are unable to uphold the general order and bring all those to justice who are responsible for organised crime. This is not due to any individual police officer. It's a lack of political will and incompetence at the level of the police senior leadership and management. It's important that we understand and have a look at what they're doing in Denmark when there are military resources made available to the police to combat gang crime and secure the safety of the citizens. We need to use the resources of our society at a maximum level to restore the general order in this country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Speaker, Isabella Lövin from the Green Party.
Herr talman.
Mr. Speaker, the world has never had so many opportunities as today, and not so many threats as today. We're at a fork in the road. Hans Rosling, he was excellent when it came to describing a positive development with increased health, the expected life expectancy, etc. Will we continue along that path, or are we going to give up and just close our borders, build walls, and pretend that we do not see the global threats? If everyone should have a chance, an opportunity for a better future, we need to deal with those threats now. And I do agree with everyone that we need to see and understand the problems that we have in our society, and I do see the problems with gang criminality, so-called honor killings, segregation in suburbs, etc. And we need to see all those things to be able to counteract them. But we also need to talk about the solutions. We can manage. We can create a sustainable world. And if we in the chamber, if we do not feel that this is possible, then who will? If we in the chamber cannot describe that future that we want to long for, then instead it will be fear guiding us in future developments of the society. And I'm afraid in the Swedish discourse, in the debate today, we just talk about fear. So that might be the vision that will guide us, not the vision that we want to see. I also feel concern. I feel that we just focus on local objectives and that we do not see the storm that is approaching. We need to see that storm now. We need to do that to save the planet. We already have climate changes. We see animals, insects disappearing. We see problems with plastic in oceans. 30 years from today, we might have more plastic than fish in our oceans. We see EU stumbling. We see global power mats being redrawn. We see global nationalism, populism, and we see the nuclear threat again becoming a reality. And it might be that we feel that those global threats are far removed from us, but the truth is that they're just as real as the fact that we have an increase in violent crime in Sweden. They're just as real. We see that in Sweden today we have strong forces. They do not want us to talk about global threats, and we always hear about from other countries that Sweden is the home of rape, etc. And they do not like what we stand for with feminism and that we work for the climate. And there is an agenda out there to dismantle Sweden. Sweden has the most progressive climate policy. We stand up for human rights and the rights of abortion, and we see that people wanted that removed from the agenda. And therefore, I would like to ask all decent political parties to look above the horizon and do not just fall for these globalized forces where it might be appealing to talk about Sweden as a country in chaos, but we should not create that fear, the feeling of hopelessness and hate, because the truth is that we should give the democratic world and the rest of the world hope. We have a strong economy. We have many people in employment. We do very well in most international indices, also looking at the climate and also health, happiness, innovation. And that is important to remember. And I would like to say that it's not taking responsibility if we do not talk about the truth. If we do not know what we have, we cannot cherish what we have. Mr. Speaker, yes, we have problems in Sweden, but the biggest threat that I see today is Sweden, where people feel that there is no hope for a better world. That is the biggest threat that I can see. A Sweden where we'll see more of an income gap, and that is where we'll end up with the Alliance Party's policy, and that will lead to more populist movements gaining power. And the biggest threat is that people become depressed and burnt out and can't work, and that we never talk about a better world and never talk about how we can do better. That is the biggest threat. The biggest threat is that we never look out above our own horizon. We should understand, we have to understand that with the sustainability, with the power of green transformation, we can build a better world. Thank you.
Next speaker, Annie Lööf from the Centre Party. The floor is yours. Mr. Speaker, so this is an election year, and we have less than 8 months until the general election day. So there's a lot to do until then, and Stefan Löfven has really failed when it comes to integration, and diversity is being penalised, and then we have youth unemployment is 4%, youth unemployment is 4%, and amongst those who are foreign-born, it's 22%. It's a terrible gap, and this is a responsibility that lies heavily on the shoulders of the government, and we see the tensions growing. We see also that people are very vulnerable in disadvantaged positions. We see things in our suburbs. We see many weapons around, people being shot with machine guns in our streets, being killed by grenades that are being left on the street. People must be able to live in peace, whether they live in their in their own home or whether it's in a supermarket. And we also see that people who have businesses, that they have to close their shops. So this is a scandal. And then we also see what happens to women. And the absurd thing is that women have accepted to be harassed by certain men. Mr. Speaker, in the autumn we had Me Too, which came with full force. And this isn't just something that came, and left us in the autumn of 2017 that we can leave behind us. No, because this is a much more important issue than that. We're only at the very beginning of this revolution, and a lot remains to be done. Because we have to have zero tolerance against sexual harassment and violations. And together we need to work on common values. And when it comes to attitudes to women, we need to increase penalties for rapists. We need to have better education at schools. And it's up to us to show that we are working for those who are vulnerable, and to ensure that everybody has the right to feel safe. I didn't sort of become involved in politics just to stand there and watch. No, I want to really ensure that we have change. I know what a functioning integration is like. I've seen it at home in Värnamo, where I grew up, but I haven't seen it in statistics or figures. But I've seen it when it comes to friends in school, neighbours, etc. in my region. I haven't seen it in tables or diagrams. I've seen it on the football pitch, in the supermarket, or wherever. And I've seen what entrepreneurship and taking action, when you do something together, what that can do and what you can accomplish. When people get a job, for example, that's when integration works. Many more can get their first job if we dare to think in along new lines, if we really invest in small companies and open the door to the labour market so that more get a chance. Security and safety, this is also something that needs to be spread to the suburbs, to the countryside. We need more police officers, more prosecutors, so that we can prosecute more criminals. Moreover, we need to allocate more funds to ensure that we can have better forensic evidence and to protect witnesses. And then increasing when we see the failed integration, what we need is political leaders that take responsibility. We need a new leadership for Sweden. Thank you very much.
The next speaker, Jonas Sjöstedt from the Left Party. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Colleagues, attendance. fall 2017, we saw the wind of a change going through Sweden and other parts of the world as well, with women saying, enough, we're not going to take this anymore, we require change. And it might be painful to hear these testimonies, but it's necessary, it's something absolutely necessary to improve for the future. Now, we need to take policy action to respond. We need better legislation on sexual crimes, consent legislation, and we have already decided on more support for women's shelters, and that was a good thing, but it takes more. We've also made changes to the legal system, but it will take more. This is also linked to power and power structures, financial power and power in the labour market. And it's not by chance that insecure jobs, that are many, well, there we also see many violations. It's about powerlessness and vulnerability. This is also about financial dependency. And I would like to see Sweden being one of the countries doing something, because we have the solutions. And it's the policymakers who have to provide solutions and hope. We cannot just paint with a big, broad black brush when describing the situation. We can make changes to the tax system so that it's not just beneficial to billionaires but also good for those who have low wages. We could have a housing policy where we try to create apartments for those who cannot afford the apartments we have today, instead of just working with redistribution. And it's not difficult to see, talking about the shootings, where they take place, where we have violent crime, where we have gang criminality. Where can they recruit to gangs? Well, in those suburbs where people have lost hope, where people are unemployed. It's about how you grow up. It's about schools. It's about societal services. And it's about injustices. And if we do not understand that, well, it will not be enough with more police officers. We need to do more.
Thank you. Next speaker, Jan Björklund from the Liberal Party. The floor is yours. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Crime Prevention Agency produced a very worrying report. Of course, you can turn your head away from that, but I don't think that's a good idea, because we see that the trust in our legal system is decreasing substantially, and we see that women's fears being outdoors in the evenings has increased substantially. Girls in suburbs are being harassed by the Muslim moral police. Women don't dare go out in the evenings. The number of police officers is now decreasing when instead it should be increasing. The number of police officers increased during the Alliance years, but now is decreasing again. And the legal system, this is a liberal creation, and those who lose out most when this system doesn't work is the individuals in society who are the weakest. And if you don't have a well-functioning state, then it's the one who can throw the biggest stone that wins. Those who have the strongest weapon, or those who have money to buy their own insurance, they're the ones who win when the law doesn't work anymore. This is our most important tool in democracy, and if Sweden is going to stick together, we need to have an integration policy that works much better. And here we need to be self-critical as well, all of us. We need to create simpler jobs with lower wages for low-educated immigrants, because it's better to have a job to go to, even if you have a low wage, rather than being socially excluded for years and years. We need to fight extremism, and there's one idea that we need to have fewer religious preschools in our suburbs. That's where I've a new line of thought for me. We see that we're being threatened from the left, from the right, terrorists, IS, Islamists. There's a whole long list of those who threaten our liberal model in the Western world. And at the end of the day, what we need is a strong school of knowledge, which is the most important way to fight intolerance and extremism. We need to have functioning integration, which will reduce social exclusion. If we have a stronger Swedish defence and armed forces and a better organisation, that is going to protect our welfare model in the Western world. We need huge models for better integration, for better schools, for better safety and security, for better security. For those of you who are waiting for this, just wait and see. It's only 8 months left.
And the next speaker is Andreas Carlson of the Christian Democrats. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This term of office is drawing to a close. And are we now in a better position than we were 4 years ago? A pattern of lacking in leadership. The red-green parties have no real idea for how to create a stronger Sweden, and Stefan Löfven failed to be a leader. He was an internal mediator, rather, fully focused on dealing with all the conflicts that arose within their own organisation and his own government. There are many examples. Stefan Löfven formed a government without a minister for integration to make the left wing happier. He said that this was an aged, problem-related concept. Was it a problem to explain what values should prevail here? Is it a problem to help people find a job and learn the language? He appointed a new head of the police from his own lines, creating problems, and many people have resigned as a result. But the top man is still in place, Sweden. But he doesn't want his leadership to be assessed or reviewed and critical. He says, rather, look at the economy, how well it's doing. I deserve praise for that, he says. Stefan Löfven is like the rooster who believes that the sun will rise on account of him making the usual morning noise, not the other way around. Because the entire world is in an upturn in the economy. Things are going well in the economy, but Sweden is lagging behind more and more in one area after the other.